Hero, at your Passover Seder this year, you may run into not one, not two, not three, but 4 children. In a traditional Passover Seder, during my favorite part, the storytelling part, we talk about the 4 children, we talk about the 4 types of children who might be sitting at your Passover Seder, at least 4 types of children, and the questions they ask and why how you answer them matters when it comes to fulfilling our responsibilities of the Passover Seder. We're going to talk about that in front of a live studio audience right after this bass. Do the beatbox, doing the Rabbi beatbox. That's terrible beatbox. I actually know some rabbis who are really good at beatboxing, so I'm sort of embarrassing myself right now, but that's okay. When am I not? Greetings, everybody. Glad to see everybody in the chat for this topic. It's been a Pesach palooza lately. If you are just joining us for the first time, or if you're watching one of my videos for the first time, I'll say if you are looking for a 90-second summary of the Passover Seder and the 4 children, or the 4 sons that come up during that part of the Seder called the Magid, this is not it. Today we're going to hang out for a little while and discuss this important topic as a way of doing a live studio recording for an upcoming podcast. God willing, we get one of these out soon, one of these days. So how this works is you join us in the chat. If you want to lurk, that's cool. You do you. Just watch and learn, that's fine. If you are present during the live broadcast, please feel free to give us some shout-outs. Tell us who you are, where you're from. If you want to give us a first name, if it's not obvious from your YouTube handle, sometimes I'll call people by their YouTube handle. And one time the YouTube handle was a bowl of soup. So I was like, hey, it's nice to see a bowl of soup. Which is a perfectly appropriate Passover thing to say. But it sounded weirder when I say a bowl of soup asks, what's the deal with Passover? So, which is also, the start of a great joke, I think. But in any case, if you're joining us live today, please feel free to give us a shout out. Let us know who you are. Let us know where you're coming from. We've got people joining these from everywhere from Southern California, Northern California, Florida, New York City. Sorry, those are the paste commercials of my upbringing for picante sauce. We've got people joining us often from Denmark and Cyprus and Germany and Thailand and Australia and all over the world. So let us know where you're coming from. And every once in a while, I'm going to say some radio announcery kind of stuff. I'll say it, everybody watching this live and on the recording. If I look a bit rough, it's the day before Passover, which means last night I was up half the night cooking brisket. For some reason, I can't get my brisket started with intention and presence until the kids go to bed. So I started my brisket at 8 o'clock-ish, pushing 9 o'clock, and that was about a 4 to 5 hour procedure just to cook it. Then I had to let it cool before I sliced it and tried to wedge it into my refrigerator. So I was up pretty late last night. And then the news woke me up pretty early this morning. So that and, having kids getting off to school. So in any case, if I look a little bit rough, it's not you, it's me. But we're going to do our level best to do a lot of learning about Passover today. So let's do this. And this is something that you might hear on the podcast from time to time as those intro beats fade out. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Joey Weissenberg and the Hadar Ensemble for those Kosher Le Pesach opening beats. Thank you to the live studio audience who is joining us today with your thoughts and shout-outs and your questions about Pesach. And most of all, thank you, Hero, for listening to the Jew Curious Show. If this is your first time here or first of, a couple of times here, I highly suggest that you subscribe to this podcast. All you have to do, really, is tap a little picture of a button on your phone or podcast listening device and then you will auto-magically have access to all of our past recordings. We're pushing 40 recordings at this point, and you will auto-magically download every future episode as it comes out. So you won't miss a beat, and you hardly have to do any work at all. Just tap that subscribe button. At this time, I want to give some shout-outs to the live studio audience who is here today. We've got Kathy from the beach in Southern California. That's the best way to do Southern California, in my opinion. No offense, Inland Empire. Carmen's coming in from Henderson, Carmen's coming in from Henderson, Nevada. A super howdy. Not a regular howdy, folks. A super howdy. Thank you for being here. Carla, my friend Carla J., also from SoCal. Glad to see you here. Carla. Karen from Philadelphia. Miriam from New Hampshire. And it's good to see every single one of you. Karen from Philly says, Rabbi, you need a crock pot. Do you think I would have gotten this far as a rabbi if I didn't have a crock pot? However, when I make my Passover brisket, there is no crock pot involved. Crock pots are good enough for, let's say, regular brisket. Any other time of the year brisket, not my Passover brisket. I'm usually doing about a 10-pound brisket this time of year, and I just don't know where I would find that kind of crock pot. I might have to somehow jury rig a bathtub or something to make that into a crock pot for the size of brisket I make. Not trying to brag, just usually have a lot of people over, and I like making my brisket 10 pounds at a time. Brandy, nice to see you from rainy Western Washington. And let's see. All right, let's get into a show. Why don't we? We could take a little swig here to clear the pipes. This is pure coffee, by the way. Oh boy. Some little brain fog this morning again. It was pretty late with that brisket. And if anybody wants my brisket recipe, I highly recommend Googling Emeril Lagasse Passover brisket. This has been our go-to recipe for, I'm going to say, 11 or 12 years now. You can modify it as you wish to make it kosher lePesach, but it does the trick. I'll just tease that there's a lot of fried onions involved, as well as a sauce that is equal parts ketchup, chili sauce, and brown sugar. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Today we are here to talk about the 4 children, or the 4 types of children, that one might encounter during a Passover Seder. And we have this tradition going back centuries. In fact, it is baked in, and now we're talking about cooking again, it is baked in to the traditional Passover Seder. In the Magid section, the storytelling part of the Seder, my favorite part, absolutely by far, it says that the Torah refers to 4 types. It says that the Torah alludes to 4 types of children who might ask questions during the Seder. And it's not really so much about the children and it's not really so much about the children themselves as it is the types of questions that they ask. And just to clarify, you might hear this or read this as the 4 sons. Excuse me, okay. Let's do this. This is the benefit of live broadcast, people. And you might hear this mentioned sometimes as the 4 sons, or read it on the page as the 4 sons, the Arba Banim. In Hebrew, which is a gendered language, Banim means sons, but it could also mean children, both kinds and every kind in between. And I prefer to take an egalitarian approach here, acknowledging that there will be children of all sorts at your Seder, not just in their level of curiosity, but also in their spectrum of gender. And so the Haggadah tells us about 4 types of children and the different questions they ask in the Seder, and these are the Hacham, the Rasha, the Tam, and one they call She'eno Yodea Lishol, meaning the one who has, so we'll go back over the meaning, and we'll go back over what these means. Chacham is the wise child. The Rasha is what they call the wicked child. Tam is the simple child. And you can take that lots of different ways. It could refer to their level of curiosity or intellectual capacity, or just a young child who is old enough to ask but doesn't know what to ask. And then finally, the She'eno Yodea Lishol is one who does not even know what to ask, right? Or one who does not even know, and she'eno yodei lishol is one who doesn't even know to ask questions, period. Might say nothing. And for each of these types of children, they ask different kinds of questions. And based on the questions that they ask, we give them different answers. For the chacham, the wise child, this is the kind of child who will ask, what are these testimonies that we're talking about? What are the statutes? What are the laws? What are the rules of Pesach? Give me all the I'm seeing what's going on here, but I really want all the details so I know how to do this for myself, and just intensely curious about all the little things that we do during the Passover Seder. And the proper response to this kind of child who's asking detailed questions is detailed answers. The Haggadah says that we teach this child some of the laws of Pesach, not just, hey, this is a time when we became free when we were slaves, but there's a rule about matzah. There's a rule about bitter herbs. There's a rule about reclining when we eat. There's rules about going to a certain kind of grocery store that we may not go to through the rest of the year, and shopping very, very carefully. There's the rule about maybe the fast of the firstborn that happens before Pesach. There's lots of rules that go into Pesach, people, and the wise child is the one who's going to be curious about those things. And so if you are blessed with a child who is curious, you should do your utmost to satisfy their curiosity. Do not leave them hanging. Because if they think that they're not going to get good answers, maybe next year they won't ask so many questions, and you might lose that child to some other intellectual pursuit. So once again, the chacham, the wise child, asks detailed questions, not just the what we do, but why we do it and how we do it, and you should do your best to satisfy their curiosity on every point. Then we come to the rasha. The word rasha means wicked, and the example that the Haggadah gives is this is the kind of child who would ask, what is this ceremony to you? Like, what does all this stuff mean to you? And the Haggadah elaborates that when they're saying it, what does this mean to, is that, and the Haggadah elaborates, when they say, what does this mean to you, they are implying, what does this mean to you and not to me? I am not part of this pursuit. This is a curious thing that you're doing. I'm just here because it's dinner time and I live here. I have no interest in this, but I'm mildly curious as to why you care about this so much. And the Haggadah tells us that we should put his teeth on edge. And there's been different reads of this throughout history. First, on the one hand, that could mean that we answer him or her sarcastically, right? Just kind of if they're asking a sarcastic question, give them a sarcastic answer to make it clear that you understand the negative place that they're coming from and you are responding in kind. Another interpretation of put this child's teeth on edge is actually, we'll say, corporal punishment, which I do not advocate for children. People raise children lots of different ways, but this is actually rearranging the teeth in their mouth, and I don't recommend that. But that's how they were saying in the Haggadah, you should respond to a salty question saltily, and the proper way to do this is to say, we do these things because what God did for me when I left Egypt, right? When he says, what does this mean to you? You say, this is meaningful to me because what God did for me and not for you. Implying that had this wicked person, had this self-selecting out person been in Egypt, he or she might not have gotten to go free. Right? So if a child asks you in a wicked manner, you should answer in a wicked manner. I confess, I don't know how I feel about this because I'm more, maybe instinctively, because I grew up in a household where humor was prized and sarcasm was frequent. That ask a stupid question, get a stupid answer. Ask a sarcastic question, get a sarcastic answer. And we all kind of got through it because we loved each other, and we knew that at the end of the day we would still be friends. But I more strongly advocate personally, I'm going to go off the page of the Haggadah a little bit. If somebody asks you a question that it's clear that they're trying to separate themselves, don't let them. Bring them into the conversation. You are more likely to win over that Rasha by saying, this is what God did for me, and P.S., BTW, FYI, also did for you, which you don't seem to realize right now, but I love you, and you're a part of this mission too, so this is what God did for us. That's the wicked child. The Haggadah says one thing, you should answer them in kind, to maybe teach them not to ask that kind of question again. And I would add a little bit more sugar to the salt, personally. Now we come to the third type of child, the tam, the simple child, right? And again, this has been interpreted in different ways. Maybe it's a child of average intelligence as opposed to the chacham. Maybe it's someone who is just not as interested. They're not against it, like the Rasha, but maybe they don't have that same level of curiosity. Nevertheless, it is incumbent upon us to teach this child what we are doing so that, God willing, this could become a part of this child's future practice as well. And an example of a question that a tam child might ask is, what is this? Right? Compare this to the Chacham's question. Okay, I see what this is. Tell me all the Mishnah and Gemara and Halakha about this. Give me all the rules. Give me all the details, the why and the how. The Tom is just saying, what's this weird thing that we're doing? Why are we talking so much before dinner, right? Why are we dipping they're just saying, what is this? What is this business going on? And how you explain the Passover Seder to the Tom, and how you explain the Passover Seder to the Tom child, for example, the Haggadah gives us this response. We do this because with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, God delivered me and our people from slavery in Egypt, right? If the kid knows how to ask, but doesn't really get the details, start with the most dramatic part of the story. Don't get into, okay, you have to eat this much matzah and you have to drink 4 cups of wine that are 3.3 ounces each. No, you start with the cataclysmic event. With a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, God rescued me from slavery and Egypt and our whole family, including you, and that's why we do the things that we do. And the child's going to be like, dude, that's amazing. Mighty hand, outstretched arm, I am in. Now, tell me what's the deal with the matzah, right? Maybe that's how you get them to be more curious or more open, right? And then once they know that they are included in this dramatic origin story, that could engender further curiosity. If it doesn't, if their simplicity doesn't spark that curiosity, at least they will know the gist of the story. It's not about the matzah. It's not about the maror, horseradish, however you do it. It's about freedom. It is about redemption from captivity based on the covenant that we have with God. That's the most important part of the story. So if somebody is too simple to ask detailed questions, cut to the chase. God did this for me with might and signs and wonders, and that's awesome, and that's why we are doing this strange dinner tonight. Gonna take a little sip of coffee before we get to the last child. Finally, that brings us to the last type of child, the she'eno lishol, the she'eno yodea lishol. And this means the child who doesn't know to ask or doesn't know how to ask or just doesn't ask, right? They don't even know that they're supposed to. They're just like, all right, it's dinner time. What's going on? Sometimes this is described as sort of the infant child, right? The child who doesn't have the capacity for speech yet, much less doesn't even know how to put words together in a question. Maybe that's what it means to not know how to ask. And the Haggadah tells us you explain it anyway, whether they ask or not, whether they know to ask or not. You go through the Seder, and at each point you say, because God did this for me, we are doing this thing, right? Because God did this for me. And I keep throwing in the me, it's not selfishly. It's because each of us is obliged to, during the Passover Seder, imagine that we ourselves were the ones who were liberated from Egypt, right? So you make it personal. Right? You say, this isn't just about our people. This isn't just about the history of our people. This is about me personally. Because God made me not a slave, we eat matzah. We drink 4 cups of wine. We dip parsley in salt water. We have a roasted bone on a plate that nobody's supposed to eat off of. So we have all these strange things, but it's all because of what God did for me, as described in the book of Exodus. And so these are the 4 sons, the Chacham, the wise child, the Rasha, the wicked child, the Tam, the simple child, and the Ben She'eno Yodea Lishol, the child who doesn't know how to ask or have the capacity to ask. And the different questions these are the different questions they may ask based on their character or their personality or their Myers-Briggs type, I guess. And these are the proper ways to respond. But I want to pull it back a little bit. I want to go up to 10, 20, 30,000 feet, try to get the big picture, try to get the meta-narrative here, because you may have all sorts of different children at your table, not just 4 kinds of children. And some child may be 4 different kinds of children, depending on the day of the week or the time of day or whether they've had their matzo ball soup yet or not. I know about an hour into the Seder, if nobody's served any food, I'm getting a little rasha there myself. This is to teach us the reason we have this variety of children and a unique answer for each is to teach us that no matter what someone's capacity is when they are coming to the table, no matter where they're coming from in their level of curiosity, their mood that day, their natural inclinations, their natural aptitudes, whoever comes to the Seder table deserves to learn the story in a way that is most suitable for them. Educators have recognized for a long time now that children, and not just children, but people have different aptitudes for learning, have different learning styles. I've heard some people described as auditory learners. They learn best by hearing lectures, or visual learners. They learn best by reading or seeing diagrams. I've even heard of kinesthetic learners, where people who learn best by movement, and these people often get involved in dance and gymnastics and things like that. People have all sorts of different learning styles, or maybe multiple learning styles and one where there's a particular strength. And each one of these different learning styles deserves an answer that works for them, because it is of utmost importance that we share this story from one generation to another and across people in the same generation. It kind of bucks it's a little bit ironic that we do the Passover Seder every year, often out of the same book, the Haggadah, that we may have multiple copies of, and then which we may have multiple copies of, so that everybody's literally reading off the same script. And at the end of the Seder, we bundle all those up, we put them back in the Passover storage box, and we bring them out the next year. So not only in a given year is everybody reading off of the same book, but from year to year, from one year to the next, people are reading off of the same book, no matter how those people have grown and changed in the intervening year. So when we seem so focused on telling the story the same way every year, this really challenges us to tell the story in different ways, to get creative based on our generosity and compassion toward different kinds of learners. So all the more so when we have a fixed script, I will challenge each of you to come to it with fresh eyes. When you are reading the Haggadah, when people are asking you questions about how you do Passover, Try to understand where they are coming from so that you can answer in a way that doesn't just work for you, but works for them as well. And a different answer might work differently for a person who's been doing it every year versus somebody who's doing it for the first time. The answer might be different for someone who's always had a good experience at a Seder versus someone who has only had bad, boring experiences at a Seder. Sometimes the Rasha comes by it honestly, I have to say. If you've only been to a Seder that seems oppressive and long and dull and boring, then you may not be open to new kinds of learning when you go to a new kind of Seder. And that's not necessarily entirely your fault. So if you encounter somebody being a Rasha, ask yourself, what have they experienced? What pain, what disappointment may they have experienced that brings them to the table in this way? And how can I stop this cycle of cynicism or sarcasm by being open with this person? Likewise, when you encounter a Tom, when you encounter someone who seems simple, whether that means not curious or incapable of learning, challenge yourself to approach them with gentleness, again with compassion, and tell the story in a way that you think they can understand. You don't have to be condescending. That means talking down to people. As a comedian in Minneapolis once taught me that joke. But come to them with openness, with honest answers, with full answers, according to their ability to understand those answers. And this also really pushes us to take initiative when we come to the She'eno Yodea Lishol. If somebody's not asking questions at all, make them curious, right? Explain things to them whether they ask you or not. Don't be overbearing or repetitive or redundant in this way, but feel free to say, I am dipping this salt water. Feel free to say to them, I am dipping this parsley in this salt water because I imagine that slavery would bring me to tears. Feel free to say to them, I'm eating this matzah this week because I know I don't always get what I want, but sometimes freedom means making do with what you have. The important thing is not the kind or quality or height of the bread that you're eating, but the fact that you have bread to share with everyone. Feel free to be a teacher. And I want to inject this, and I want to inject this intention into all of my teaching, that anybody who learns from me, I highly encourage you, if you think it's wise teaching, to pass it on. This is not a binary student-teacher thing. Throughout my life, I have been both a student and a teacher, and that goes back and forth several times on a daily basis. Many times I'm a student, probably more so than I am a teacher. And I experience this most when doing this podcast or making videos, that there's an old saying, he who teaches learns twice. And that's certainly true for me. I learn from my students all the time. Likewise, I would commend to your attention the opportunity, even if you feel like you're still learning, if you know a little bit more than someone else or know how to guide someone. Give people answers when they ask questions. You can be the teacher too, hero. And Passover challenges each of us to take on that role. So if you learn nothing else today, I want you to understand that the 4 children represented in the Magid section, the storytelling section of the Passover Seder, isn't necessarily a guide to child rearing per se, or how to survive the Seder with children of many different personalities. And I'll say with my 4 children, I have at least 5 to 7 different personalities present, depending on their mood that day. But it's to teach us, I think, a larger lesson, that the Passover Seder and the lessons that it has to teach is appropriate for everyone. And sometimes you have to get creative, but it's totally worth it so that everybody can understand according to their capacity. that's what I wanted to share with you today about the 4 children. Again, this number 4 comes up quite a bit. We've also had a session on the 4 questions, the Manish Tana song that asks the 4 questions of how this night of Passover is different from all other nights. We've talked about the 4 cups, the 4 cups of wine that are the 4 cups of wine that are traditionally drunk during a Passover Seder. So we've got 4 cups, 4 questions, 4 children. And God willing, your Seder lasts 4 hours or less, or more, if you like. But however I can work in the number 4, I'm happy to do so. Little count von count there for you. Okay, with that, I want to go to, I've been talking quite a bit here this morning. Just want to go with that, I want to go to the live studio audience to see how people are sharing with one another. Miriam observes that each lecture so far has featured a food of the day. So apparently every time I get on the air, we're talking about some kind of food, whether it's wine or big red soda or brisket. Today it's been about the brisket. Miriam's asking about eggplant. That's great. I shared a sermon recently where I described my distaste for eggplant, and I gave that sermon I gave that sermon last Friday night at a synagogue where I teach, and it will heretofore be known as the eggplant sermon. People came to me the next day and said, "Hey, Rabbi, love the eggplant sermon," or "I don't like eggplant either." So not for nothing, we talk a lot about food on this show. Dodie, welcome. Glad to see you here from sunny Southern California. Trig, good to see you here. Trig says, how are you kids doing today? That's not a question I can answer. I'm doing fantastic. Trig says, how are you kids doing today? So that's my favorite kind of question. It's easy to answer. I'm doing fantastic. I've got a brisket soaking in the refrigerator. Life could not be better. In fact, I'll say, if it turns out tomorrow night for the Seder, like it turned out after I cooked it, this could be my finest brisket in years. I use the exact same recipe every single year. Often we're in a different apartment or house, and so the ovens, are kind of touch and go. But this one turned out fantastic, if I do say so myself. I see Milo has made it from Denmark. Good to see you here, Milo. One of our students shares, I'm dyslexic, so I have my own kind of learning technique, and that is perfectly appropriate. There have been recognitions for centuries. Before we even knew, I'll say, what dyslexia was, probably, the rabbis a couple thousand years ago realized that people have all different kinds of learning styles, or things that they're good at, things that they're less good at. And the important thing is that we reach everybody where they're at with the important lesson of Passover, lest you think it's just something for the Chacham or just something that the Rasha needs to hear. The Tam needs to hear it as well. The She'eno Yodei Lishol needs to hear it. Kathy shares, sometimes we can draw out kids by asking them a key question and inviting them to be your helper in the Seder. And I think that takes a special kind of attentiveness and compassion to say, okay, which one of these kids is checked in? Which one of these kids is checked out? How do I make sure that the checked in kids stay checked in? And how do I bring the checked out kid? And how do I bring the checked out kids back to the table, both literally and figuratively? I think that's why we have so many things for kids to do during Passover, especially the hiding and seeking of the afikomen, that last piece of matzah that we're supposed to eat. Another very important question. Well, another very important question. How long do you marinate the brisket? I do not. So if you're asking me about my brisket recipe, again, happy to share it with you. Once again, you can always Google Emeril Lagasse Passover brisket, and you will find about how I cook my brisket with some minor substitutions to make it kosher Pesach. I like to use the sugar-based ketchup rather than the corn syrup-based ketchup to keep the kidney out when I can. But I don't really marinate the brisket. Instead, I take the brisket and I turn the oven up to 500, sear it. Well, no, let me take that back. So how I make my brisket is first I take a brisket, usually about an 8 or 10 pounder. It looks like a big tongue, and it's kind of unwieldy. I use a foil roasting pan just because that's the easiest thing to let it spread out in. I know it's not very environmentally friendly necessarily, but I do try to recycle it when I'm done. So big roasting pan, rinse the brisket, lay it out in there, pat it dry, and then I stuff it with garlic. You take a paring knife and you put little incisions throughout the volume of the brisket and stuff it with whole cloves of garlic. So I'll get a head of garlic or two. Separate out all the cloves, then make little incisions in the brisket, stick the garlic in those incisions, and then in a 500-degree oven, brown it on both sides, about 5 to 7 minutes to a side, just to kind of sear it on the outside to seal the juices in as best you can. Then immerse it in about a quart or so of beef broth. I often wind up using the powdered beef stock, the kosher for Passover powdered beef stock, which is not really beef as much as it is brown MSG powder. So you can make your own variations. You can use real beef broth if you like. I usually don't have that kind of time. But while it's sitting in a stock bath, cover it with foil, put it back in the oven at 350 for an hour. So we've seared it. Now we're sort of broiling it in beef broth. And then while that's cooking, you fry up about 3 large onions. Just, you can caramelize them or just shy of caramelized. And then you make your brisket sauce out of a cup of ketchup, a cup of chili sauce, which can be lots of different things depending on what part of the world you're in. I've used sriracha or something similar. I've used slug, which is basically an Israeli preparation of minced jalapenos. I've used that kind of Thai chili sauce that looks like it's mostly sugar syrup with flakes of red peppers in it. But equal parts ketchup, chili sauce, brown sugar with some salt, pepper, garlic powder, onion powder, and Emeril's essence, or a kosher for Passover substitute for that. You can actually make your own based on what's the spices that are in there. And so after the brisket's been broiling for about an hour, top it with those fried onions and the sauce and kind of swish it all around and put it back in the oven at 350 for 2 to 3 hours, depending on how big it is. So I know you just asked me about my marinade, but I wanted to give you the full Monty because everybody should try this brisket. If meat is your thing. If meat's not your thing, forego the brisket. You can have a biscuit, I guess, but no biscuits on Passover. Maybe some hardtack or matzah, as I like to call it. Miriam asks, can you switch back and forth between wine and grape juice? I think that's a fantastic idea, especially if 4 cups of wine might be a little much for you. It is the exact same blessing either way, whether you are drinking wine or grape juice. We bless God and conclude that blessing with Borei Pri Hagafen, the God who creates the fruit of the vine. And so as far as the blessings are concerned, wine and grape juice are the same thing, so you can absolutely switch back and forth if that gets you through the Seder. If that's how you want to do it, that is okay. Kathy shares she was at a Seder where one parent had a toy frog collection for her kids. There's lots of different ways that you can keep kids engaged during a Seder. I think this goes back to our topic of the 4 types of children. Some children have a very long attention span for a full Seder. Some children do not. So I've seen people have toy frogs on the table that they play with. One that I have kind of mixed feelings about is the set of 10 Plagues finger puppets, or they have 10 Plagues masks that you can wear. Just because making children's toys out of plagues is a little bit off for me, especially when we have that part where we withdraw drops of wine from the second cup of wine, diminishing our joy because of the plagues that the Egyptians suffered. So, making children's toys out of the 10 plagues to kind of make fun of the plagues or make light of them just doesn't seem appropriate to me. However, I believe that however you get your kids through the Seder so that they can experience as much of it as possible is okay with me. You do what you need to do, however it works for your family. Miriam asks, what is brisket exactly besides... Miriam asks, what is brisket exactly besides beef? It looks tough. My understanding is that the brisket is what we might call the beef breast, as it were. It's sort of the underside, like the pectoral muscle and that neighborhood. Please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong out there in podcast land. Trick shares Kermit is crying in the corner when we talk about the frog plagues. Dodie says, throw it on the barbecue. So barbecue brisket, I've never tried doing a Passover brisket on the grill. It's a bit thick, I think, for the grill. I prefer to kind of braise it or broil it or however you describe it, stewing it in its own juices for 3+ hours. Just going back through the chat, see if there are any questions that I missed. A little hold music. Many of you know I love to grill meat. You also know that I love zombie movies. What you may not know is that I love bossa nova music. So a few questions today. I know we've talked a lot about Passover stuff this week, and if at all possible, doing my level best to get these podcast episodes out on the actual podcast before Passover. My goal with all of these has been to teach as much as I possibly can about Passover, and it may not all stick. Many of these things you may already know, but I'm looking for those moments that I wish I had going into a Passover Seder. Like, I get that. I know a little something about this going in, which allows you to sort of relax and enjoy the Seder more, get more out of it. That's kind of what I'm attempting to go for here. Listen up, heroes. I have been overwhelmed with gratitude once again for those of you who have shown up for the live studio audience for this episode. And hero, I am most grateful to you for listening to the Jew Curious show. If you would like to join our live studio audience for an upcoming episode, the best way to do that is to find me on YouTube. Go to youtube.com, search for Rabbi John Carrier. That's John with an H, Carrier with 3 R's, just like the big boat that carries airplanes. And about once a week, I update my schedule so that you can see all the topics that we will be learning together that week. You just click the little button on the one that you want to go to. It will notify you when it starts. And you can join us in our live studio audience. And the benefit of this, not just for you, but for the entire podcast, is I firmly believe if you have a question, somebody else out there has that question too. So if you have the curiosity and the bravery to show up and ask your question, not only will you get an answer live, but somebody else out there will get an answer as well. And I'm delighted by the prospect that we are co-creating this podcast together. Furthermore, if you would like to get to know more Jew-curious people just like you, I highly recommend that you check out the Jew Curious Community Center. All you have to do is go to jewcurious.show/JCC, as in Jew Curious Community Center, and register there. You will get instructions on how to find our private, carefully guarded, lovingly tended, and troll-free Facebook group, where Jew-curious people just like you gather together to ask questions, to share their stories, to share support with one another on this important journey. So check that out at jewcurious.show/JCC. And before we wrap up, I just want to point out that this show is entirely made possible by the students of the Jew Curious School. If you've been looking for a way to take your Jewish learning to the next level, but especially if you have had trouble finding a place where there are people like you, a rabbi who gets you, the Jew Curious School might just be the place for you. Go check it out at jewcurious.school, as in SCHOOL/info, and find out if the Jew Curious School is right for you. We have 3 live lessons a week in there on a variety of topics, from the Torah portion of the week to a deep dive into particular Jewish topics like Jewish time, God, Israel, Torah, and a complete and ongoing Introduction to Judaism course. But my favorite thing about the Jew Curious School is the community we have built in this context of learning. We have a community forum where nice, friendly, supportive people are there to share their stories, share their questions, share their recipes, and most of all, support each other in this Jew Curious journey. If you're curious about whether this might be right for you, go to jewcurious.school/info and check that out. Hero, it has been my delight to learn about the 4 children of the Passover Seder with you today. And until next time, peace. All right, I'll stick around for a little bit. If anybody has questions, I'll just say, if you liked this episode, please hit the like button down there below the video. There's a little thumbs up, so hit the thumbs up if you will. Kathy is sharing with Milo. I know Milo has some goats, and one of our friends, Val, has a horse to sell for Passover so that they can sell the horse feed as well. And Kathy found buyers for chametz buyers. God willing, this morning I'm going to get something up there today on how to sell chametz in the Jew Curious School. So if you still need to sell your chametz, I recommend getting in touch with somebody local if possible. But if that's not possible for you and you need to sell your chametz before Pesach, right after this video, I'm going to go over to the Jew Curious School, put something up in the community forum to help facilitate your chametz transactions. So people are questioning my taste in bossa nova music. Yes, it's a type of Brazilian jazz. I also love klezmer. Possibly the greatest stroke of luck of all time is that when my wife and I got married, we didn't want to go DJ. We went band, and the band that we got was a klezmer band with kind of a Latin backbeat, if you will. They played like Argentinian music and bossa nova, and it sounded a lot like a bossa nova klezmer mashup, which, boy, I couldn't have been happier with that. Good to see you, Adit, who says, happy Passover to all. We are going to have one more show before Passover. Tomorrow we will be talking about the Parashat HaShavua, which this week isn't the normal Parashat HaShavua. So if you came out of Metzora and you thought you were going to go right into Achrei Mot, I'm going to have you hit the pause button, because because this week's Torah reading is not one of the regular Parshiot. It is the Torah reading for the first day of Passover, which falls on Shabbat. So we'll be talking about that here in the live stream tomorrow, share different aspects of that with you. Same will be happening next week. Next week, we're only going to have 4 shows instead of 5, because Friday is a Jewish holiday. So we'll have shows Monday through Thursday on various topics. And then not this weekend, not next weekend, but the weekend after that, we will pick up again with the normal Parashat HaShavua cycle. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining me today, for asking some great questions, for giving each other high fives, for sharing musical tips, recipes, and places to sell your farm animals for Passover, knowing that you will get them back. They will not become anybody's Seder, I promise you. All right, everybody, thanks for joining me today. Couldn't do this without you, really, from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, and until next time, heroes, peace.